travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. Well, plenty going on this evening and a lot of it around consumer shares. We'll focus on that in a few moments. You'll hear from Barbara Creecy, the Minister of Transport, as well, around not privatization at all, but certainly more private sector involvement more quickly in our railway system. I couldn't help but notice today the reporting around the Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, Gwede Mantashe, and the cadastral system. I suppose a mineral mapping system might be a better way of understanding it. Basically, where if Company A wants to prospect in a certain place, they need to know where Company B is already mining. And the cadastral system is what shows you that. Most countries that have a mining industry have an online system. We don't. We use paper, and we've been promised and promised one more, that there would actually be an online cadastral system. And again, it's been delayed. And you get to the point and you almost wonder if, in fact, the symbolism of another delay says so much that people are now, well, why should we bother? I mean, why should we bother mining in South Africa if you can't have an online cadastral system? You should. I mean, this is what we want people to be able to do. We want them to be sitting in Canada or Beijing or wherever and looking at our online cadastral system. That's what we want them to be doing. And yet again, another delay in why that is happening. I realize it's got to be done properly and it's got to be done carefully. But so many other places have done it. Botswana's done it years before us. Really? We're not able to do it? It's very, very disappointing. Let me use that word.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, I must say, when I first heard the news and I was walking past at City Media in the Eyewitness newsroom, when I first heard that David Mabuza, the former deputy president, had passed away, I had a flood of memories coming back to me in different ways. And you may recall in a previous life, I spent quite a lot of time watching politics, still do, of course, in some ways. And my first memory of David Mabuza, I'm afraid to say, isn't necessarily a pleasant one. It was back in 2010 when Mzilikazi wa Afrika, a journalist working for the Sunday Times then, received a fax. As a result of receiving that fax, he was arrested and taken to Mpumalanga. It was an extraordinary story. I remember being in the magistrates' court one Friday morning reporting on the case, and then he was released. It was really the first time that the phrase David Mabuza, or DD, David Dabeza, really came into my mind. And after that, I watched him very, very closely where I could. And I could not really believe how well and how cleverly he had managed the power of politics, or the politics of power, if you like, to go from Mpumalanga to really controlling the deciding votes at the ANC's conference in Nasrec in 2017. That conference where the ANC delegates eventually, by a very slim margin, voted for President Cyril Ramaphosa rather than for Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And even after that, Mabuza had an unbelievable ability to manipulate power. Very, very effective at it. And this will be one of my lasting memories of him. Because even after the 2019 election, President Ramaphosa was ready to appoint a cabinet, and it was Mabuza who delayed that, said he needed to go through an ANC process first. Just a demonstration of how powerful he was. I don't think we've ever had a situation in our politics before where a president says they're ready to appoint a cabinet and then is suddenly stopped by someone who's, not a president. It was an extraordinary story. And yes, I think some of the obituaries around Mabuza will be very interesting. There's so many interesting details. His public statement that he had been poisoned, that he had had to go to Russia for regular medical treatment as a result. And I do wonder if maybe that was one of the reasons. I have no idea as to what's happened now. But I think his lasting contribution, perhaps, And the way in which some people may choose to remember him is that he probably, through his own actions, brought about an end to state capture. Probably. I'm sure that's a contested comment, and there'll be others who disagree. But I think if David Mabuza had done things differently, state capture might not have ended where it ended.
7:02.
7:02.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
The Transport Minister Barbara Creecy saying she wants to get the private sector involved in funding the rehabilitation of our railroads in the short term, because we can't wait for the sort of formal, more long-term private sector participation processes. You know, Transnet needs a huge amount of money to upgrade its rail network, its locomotives, issues around the ports as well. Well, I'm pleased to tell you the Transport Minister Barbara Creecy is on the line for you now. Minister, good evening. I do appreciate the time. Thank you. What kind of program do you want to follow to get the private sector involved sooner rather than later?
Good evening, Stephen, and greetings to your listeners. Well, Stephen, I think here we are talking about offers that we have had from existing Transnet customers who are prepared to support maintenance programs on Transnet's 5 priority freight corridors. And obviously, this would be short-term financing. What we are doing is we're working together with Transnet, the Presidency and National Treasury to try and develop a legal environment that would allow such contributions, and also find a way in which these contributions could be repaid in a regulated manner.
When you say contributions, are you talking they would give Transnet money would do the work, Transnet would do the work with that money? Or are you talking maybe a big mining company perhaps says, actually, we'll lend you the people, or we'll even fix it for you and you need to pay us back in some way?
It could be contributions, either monetary contributions or contributions in kind. We have already worked in partnership with the private sector on what we call the shuts, which is when we do major maintenance on our lines. There was a very successful shut that took place last year on the iron ore line, and a more moderately successful shut that took place on the coal line. And in those particular instances, there were some in-kind contributions made. But I think that because it's obviously cheaper for the private sector to be moving bulk minerals on rail rather than on road, some of the customers are prepared to make larger contributions. But we obviously, while we welcome this idea, we do need it to be done in a manner that is lawful.
Well, that brings me obviously to the next problem, which is you would need to either, reinterpret the current laws or regulations, or actually change the laws or regulations. And those could take quite a long time to do either of those. To change a law can, as you know, Minister, better than I, can take years.
No, I don't think we're talking about a legislative change. Then I think we rather go with our existing third-party participation and, in due course, the issuing of the requests for proposals. I think this is really intended within the framework of the existing Public Finance Management Act to give us a lawful quick fix. So this is why we've been working on a mechanism, and I do hope that I have been assured that it's not going to take forever, because we are also looking for finance for immediate maintenance from the National Treasury's budget facility for infrastructure, and also from Transnet's existing maintenance budgets.
I'm presuming, so let me put it like this, the short-term scheme which we're talking about now, the longer-term plans which are in the works, would they result in any change of ownership? Or would Transnet and therefore government still own the actual railways?
The intention is that government will remain the owner of both the railways and the ports. So if we can understand that in our ports we've got private sector terminal operators, those operators operate on a lease period. When the lease period comes to an end, the terminal and the infrastructure revert to the possession of the state. Another model that we have in our country are the toll roads, the national toll roads that are run by SANRAL. So those roads have been built and operated by a private concession company, but some of those concessionaires are coming to an end, and the infrastructure will revert to the state. So it would be a model similar to what we have elsewhere. We've done a lot of learning, Stephen, from international examples, and what we find is in the international situation where the state remains the overall in control of the infrastructure tends to remain in better condition, the fees are more affordable, and there's better interoperability. In rail reform examples internationally where different lines have been sold to different companies, there can be a problem with interoperability. And also there have been complaints that these owners try to squeeze as much profit as they can out of the lines, and as a consequence, the condition of those lines deteriorates.
The other big issue, of course, at the moment is the Road Accident Fund, and there's a lot going on around Collins Letswalo, the currently suspended CEO. But you suggested this week that you want to bring back a draft bill that was actually scrapped several years ago. So the system you're proposing, that bill proposed, would be a lot quicker. There'll be a sort of scale of payouts depending on the level of injury caused by an accident. You wouldn't have to prove liability, all of those things. It would stop this idea that a foreign national who earns in dollars suddenly gets paid for lifetime earnings in rands, things like that. Do you believe you'd be able to get this through Parliament? It seemed to just disappear last time.
Yes, I'm not quite sure what happened. I know it went through the committee stage, but it didn't actually get passed by the National Assembly at the end of the fifth Parliament. I think there were quite a few bills that never actually got passed. I don't see an alternative way forward where we can limit the contingent liability that the state faces in this situation. I think that we have a situation where those who can afford private legal fees tend to be better compensated, and obviously if the taxpayer is financing this, it's not really a fair situation. I think we've also seen a situation where there are some unscrupulous practitioners who chase ambulances and get people who might be somewhat traumatized to sign up for handing over half their benefits in exchange for court support. So I suppose that, all of that just adds to the bill that the state has to pay at the end of the day. I know that the heads of courts are extremely annoyed with the number of default judgments and the road accident cases that are clogging our courts. So we feel that a no-fault system would be a better approach. And obviously, the citizens still have the right to approach the courts where they feel that's necessary. But I think a practice that rules out this as the rule could only enhance the beneficiation from the fund.
The Transport Minister Barbara Creecy on The Money Show. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Dr. Juanita Maree is the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Association of Freight Forwarders. Juanita, good evening to you. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, we need as much investment in our railway system as quickly as possible. Is this a good move by the Minister to try and shunt things along a little bit?
Yeah, I think so, because let us say first, good afternoon or good evening, and it's nice speaking to you. I think what we know in the logistics industry is that you need the rail modality, the ocean modality, and the air freight modality, because they work in a graph between the load, the distance, and the speed. And if we don't look at all the modalities, we're actually doing injustice to our logistics network.
Do you believe the private sector would be able to make quite a big contribution? I presume some of the mining companies would want to get involved in this as quickly as they could.
Yeah, I think various people, not just in the mining industry, if I look at the containerized cargo, and that's very much your complex industry or your complex economy, that goes from the marine side, which is the tugboats, helicopters, to the ship-to-shore crane. Then you have your RTGs, the equipment in the port terminal, and then you go to your back of port operation, and then you can connect with the rail network, and you can bring it up to Gauteng. So I think there's different point solutions that you can do, and then you can stitch the value chain together. So I think it's very exciting that the door is opening for private sector indeed.
I mean, it's not just opening. I think it's being held open as widely as possible by some aspects in government, and we see that particularly around Transnet at the moment. The big risk, of course, is sort of political and sort of legal, that someone might find a way to delay it. And I don't mean someone in government. I mean maybe someone outside government for whatever reason. There are people who are opposed to the private sector being involved in this. They do have legitimate arguments. And I do worry a little bit, as I said to the Minister, that regulations may somehow get in the way.
Yeah, I think we must go back to why do we do that? Because we want economic growth, and economic growth needs capital, and it needs technical skills, and we need to find a way. I don't think we have the silver bullet, but when private sector and government works together, and specifically on the design from a logistics network, because it's a shared infrastructure, we are there to help and to build, and then it just makes the whole system much better. So, and it's not new. I think if you look around the world, it's not a monopoly. It's a shared infrastructure and these different activities that you can outsource.
I mean, you would like to say in 1 year this will happen, in 2 years this will happen, within 5 years that will happen. I fear things are not that clear, or certainly not to me at the moment.
Yeah, well, the DOT sent out a request for information, and what we believe there was 162 applications that they received back, and specifically on the container sector, there's 62. So I know the DOT will come back to industry around about the 15th of, let's say, July, around about there, just give you feedback, and then they will go to the market request for proposals in August. So I don't think the process is too slow. Yes, we want it in private sector to happen immediately, but I think there is some things to put into place. And also what we caution a little bit, it's not that when we look at the ports, yes, we want port productivity and when you want to drive it, but when we look at the results from Transnet over the last, let's say, 2 months, it's remarkable because they have now new equipment, they refurbished the old equipment, there's a synergy between the hoarder side, the marine side, and the evacuation from the terminals. So that brings a lot of stability in the system and trust, I would think, that we so desperately needed.
Dr. Juanita Marie, thanks very much indeed. Chief Executive Officer of the South African Association of Freight Forwarders.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Norman McKechnie is an independent investor. Norman, good evening. The big beautiful bill goes through last night in Washington, and suddenly the rand starts to look a little stronger. Was it really the dollar being quite a lot weaker?
Stephen, I think that's correct. I think in essence that bill is fairly expansionary. Looks like U.S. government deficits will probably be somewhere in the region of 7% plus, which is high. And yeah, it just means that there's more borrowing that needs to be done by government. And I think also if you look at some of the other factors in the US, you do have slowing consumer credit. You've got high interest rates. You've got liquidity, which is likely to tighten once they pass the debt ceiling bill. They will withdraw liquidity because they can now issue bonds. They put money as a precaution into the market. So, yeah, I think the rand strength is really just a function of what we've seen in terms of dollar weakness.
It's been interesting to watch just one particular group of shares on the JSE over the last few days. And I'm talking, the Foschini Group, TFG, may be the best example of this. Sort of up 2% one day, down 2% the next day, actually up 3% today. But quite a few other shares in that sort of bracket. Pepcore, I would suggest, and maybe even Clicks and Mr. Price. What's going on? Is this all about consumer strength or consumer weakness?
I think if you look at it, and perhaps instead of looking shorter term, if we start, let's say, 12 months or so ago, and perhaps with the share prices a bit before that, they've anticipated a pickup in retail sales, which actually did happen. You did see retail sales picking up. You saw consumer spending over the last 12 months up 3%. And I think the share prices have run particularly hard. They probably ran too hard, and that's why we've had certain of those shares coming back and weakening. So something like Mr. Price was up sort of almost 2.5 times and is off 30-odd% from its peak, which we saw sort of in the last 6 months or so. And I think the choppiness that we're seeing is we still have uncertainty out there. I mean, households have saved probably by 1% in the first quarter of this year. There's pressure on the consumer. Consumer confidence is low. The index is at -10, albeit that the average is -1 over time, which, if you think about it, being a minus doesn't really inspire confidence. I think the other thing we've seen, households have pulled back the amount of debt which they've got as a percentage of the SA economy is reduced. Employment growth, while we saw pick up post-COVID, but if you go back 5 years to prior to COVID, employment growth has only grown by less than 0.5% per annum over that period. So it's not an exciting picture, and you throw into the mix high real interest rates. Our interest rates have probably come off about 1% in terms of what the repo rate has done. But if you look at the difference in, and certainly what consumers are paying relative to inflation, there's a squeeze. So I think there's perhaps a bit of toing and froing with investors, some looking to bottom fish now. I think if one looks at it with all those factors, it could be a while before we see things start to pick up, Stephen.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, a very stark picture as well, of course. Norman McKechnie, thank you so much. Independent investor, bringing the time to 6:30.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, good to hear from you this evening on 011 8830702 and 0214460567. I was just reading just before I came on air to speak to you this evening about the Household Affordability Index, which suggests that, in fact, food in Durban is cheaper than it is in any other major city in South Africa. Now, I understand that there are a very, very large number of factors that go into food prices. I mean, lots of different factors. And some of them can be a little bit surprising. Sometimes it's around the ability of people to shop around. Sometimes it's the ability of some of the big chains to sort of push the price down on bread, for example. Sometimes they have certain loss leaders, and when those end, there are other impacts. But I was still quite interested in how it could be that Durban could have cheaper food than Joburg or Cape Town. I'd automatically assumed that your food would either be cheaper if it were closer to where it was grown, or more likely if it was a bigger centre. I just presumed Joburg. Shows you how little I know.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Well, confirmation in the last 24 hours or so from the Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, Greta Mantashe, that the new online mine mapping system, it's a cadastral system in the trade, it's been delayed again, this time for another 3 months. Will only go live, I think, in November. And the current paper system, very difficult or almost impossible for a mining company to know what other companies are mining what and where they can prospect. Peter Leon is a mining expert and partner at Herbert Smith Freehills. Peter, good evening to you. I do appreciate the time. I mean, yet another delay. There have been so many promises about this, and even the ministry seemed to have previously understood how important a new online cadastral system was.
Good evening, Stephen. It's really extraordinary. I mean, this issue's been going on for years. In fact, the promise was made initially by Susan Shabangu when she was the minister. They introduced supposedly an electronic online system called SAMRAD, the South African Mineral Rights Application System, but never worked. It was something that the department had formulated itself without using any outside consultants. So the problem was that companies still had to basically use a paper-based system. That gives rise to all sorts of issues, particularly, fraud, corruption, dishonesty, the rest of it. And that's why most African mining jurisdictions, in Namibia, for example, the north of us, Botswana and so on, have all got online cadastral systems and, in fact, have had them for more than 10 years. The World Bank helped countries roll them out. So it is extraordinary that South Africa in 2025 does still not have a proper cadastral system. And as you say, it's been delayed again, having been promised for the last 15 years.
Is it that difficult to do? I mean, online mapping is quite a big industry. There are lots of people who help you do it. Other people around us know how to do it. It can't be that hard.
No, it isn't. I mean, in fact, the Minerals Council offered to donate a bespoke system to the Department of Mineral Resources about 2 years ago, and the department said, well, they couldn't accept it, but maybe they should have, because they then went out to tender. There was a problem with that because the State Information Technology Agency said the tender was irregular, so that held the thing up by another 6 or 8 months. Eventually, somebody was appointed last year, a Canadian company with a South African company in some sort of joint venture, and there are obviously black empowerment requirements around that. So it's taken an awfully long time, and one can only hope that once the system rolls out in the Western Cape initially, later this year, it's actually going to work. But clearly we can't work with the current system.
There's so many aspects to this, and the fact there's been a delay after a delay leading up to this new delay makes me wonder about the symbolism. If you keep being promised something and you keep being disappointed, even at sort of the last minute, international investors, people in Beijing who want to go on our online transparent cadastral system and find they still can't, may just wonder if we're actually at all serious.
Well, it's a very good point. I mean, it doesn't make us look very serious. The other issue is that most other African mining jurisdictions have these systems for years. In fact, I was just thinking about it this afternoon. I was working in Nigeria more than 10 years ago, helping the government with their new mining code. And they'd already set this thing up and got the World Bank to help them. And that's when I sort of focused on this issue in South Africa and started asking questions as to why we didn't have one, which, as I say, they eventually came up with one in 2009, the SAMRAD system, but it never worked properly. So it's basically been dysfunctional from the get-go.
You made the point that a paper-based system has all sorts of problems, and I know there's been quite a consistent claim from an MP in the DA, James Lorimer, that in fact the longer a paper system is working, the more potential there is for wrongdoing. I mean, I have no causal reason to believe that that's true, but the virtue of an online system is that it does bring a lot more transparency. That must be very, very powerful in this space.
Well, that's the main reason for it. And as you said in your introduction, everybody knows who's got which rights and what's still available. That's really important. But actually, the point that James makes is substantiated by the fact there was quite a famous case involving Kumba and Imperial Crown Trading, which you might remember, Stephen, where exactly that happened, where we had a paper-based system, the whole system was suborned, documents were forged, this company, ICT, got a prospecting right over the Sishen iron ore mine, which Kumba had owned, since the 1950s in various forms. And that's because it was a paper-based system, it was so easy to suborn it and undermine it.
It is astonishing. Peter Leon, thank you very much indeed. Mining expert and partner at Herbert Smith Freehills. At some point, I suppose the problem is that when the ministry makes certain offers and government says no, when we have the government saying they'll do it themselves and it doesn't really work, when we have almost unexplained delays in some ways. And the minister did say yesterday, as I understand it, that it was, that there was some more work to do and this needed to be done very precisely. It does lead to questions. Now, you've got no facts. I can't say this is why this has happened or this is why, or put any kind of motive to it. It does just, I think, leave people very, very disappointed.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Some more developments today on the National Lottery and Sizakaya, one of their main owners, Gold Rush, defending Sizakaya, which is the consortium that won the National Lottery. I understand now the EFF writing to the president to ask him about it, and specifically, I think questions being asked more and more about the relationship, which fairly or unfairly keeps coming back to the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, that his wife's twin sister is a member of Gold Rush, and that's Sizakaya. And all of the people involved must have known that this would come out. There's no way that it wasn't going to come out. And Amabungani have been doing quite a lot of reporting on it, so has News 24. And of course, they've done previous reporting on Mashatile. I do wonder, though, at what point we're going to see people having to answer questions under oath. And I keep making this point. Why did Parks Tau say so clearly that it was a difficult decision? What was he trying to say when he first made that public statement? It's very, very interesting. Maybe there's nothing in it. And maybe he'll explain it for himself. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I can't help but feel that there's a lot going on here, and a lot of it is to do with politics, particularly perhaps when the EFF is preparing for a new leader in the ANC. They may be targeting Mashatile in this way, or using the lottery perhaps to target him.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, you probably know the person behind SpaceX is South African. I didn't know until recently that some of the components being used in their space launches are coming from other South African companies. So firms like Dragonfly Aerospace, CubeSpace, Samira Sense, all making important contributions to recent launches. Knife Capital is heavily invested in Samira Sense. They've made some other interesting investments of late. Kit van Sail is a co-founder and partner at Knife Capital. Kit, good evening. What kind of services is Samira Sense providing to someone like Elon Musk? Clearly, they've found a nice little niche in the market.
Yeah, look, there's not just them, as you say. Five of our local companies are producing all sorts of products, and technologies that are related to space tech. But Samira specifically make optical payloads. Johan, the founder, would kill me for it, but basically space cameras. So if you think about observation and, for climate change, agri, all the rest of it, something needs to record these things. And at high speed up there, it's quite difficult to take videos and photos and so forth. So, yeah, that's been made in Somerset West and expanding globally. And so is CubeSpace and a few others, making all sorts of interesting equipment that's needed in the global space race.
It's interesting that they've been able to develop this outside of the kind of places you would expect space tech to come. And I realize we've had various involvements in satellites for quite a long time. But you would expect something like this to come out of a kind of space or an aerospace hub. Instead, I imagine people are having to do it all by themselves. I mean, yes, I realize information moves around the world, but they're not situated next to other people who are doing it, is my point.
True. I mean, you have to be plugged into the ecosystem, but you've got to remember there is a history of space tech and technology in South Africa. Specifically, the University of Stellenbosch has had some amazing spin-outs in technology when it comes to this kind of technology, as well as, you know, all sorts of things around it. You know, you need technologists, you need the infrastructure to do it. And then, more importantly, you need to do this in a cost-effective way. You know, so as governments are not as heavily funded into the private sort of satellite space, it becomes a bit of a cost-efficient way to do it. And you know, good technologists, South African can-do attitude, and the whole little ecosystem around it make us a perfect little hub for space tech. To be quite honest,
we can also do it quite cheaply, Keith.
Exactly. With the rand and yeah, so you go. I mean, you know.
You've also been involved as Knife Capital in a company called Stick It, and it helps schools manage their money. Please tell me it'll also help my children to manage cash for the tuck shop, because there's nothing worse than having to dig around for a bit of cash. And what kind of services are providing for schools?
Yeah, so schools also, I mean, it's a more complex ecosystem than one would imagine, just in terms of what's going on around it. So we, as Knife Capital, you know, just one of the local VCs, have got quite a few investments in companies like Snaplify does content. We have D6 that manage sort of school systems, and Stickit is our sort of latest investment in the let's call it school ecosystem. But yeah, it does manage. It's a fintech startup. It transforms the way schools and kids and parents manage money. But more importantly, you know, financial inclusion and education and that. So just in terms of, you know, the whole value of money, how to invest, you know, how to share, how to save, how to budget, and how to earn. I mean, these are all sort of in a gamified way being taught to children while actually taking their armband or their card, or, you know, there is money around. And remember, kids don't necessarily have credit cards or digital identities or financial identities yet, because it can be exploited. So you need to do it in a responsible way.
Indeed, and keep them away from the gamification of online gambling, in my view.
Yeah, rather teach them financial habits while they're spending. You know, while they're spending your hard-earned cash.
Indeed, I know some tuck shops that have done quite well. Yes,
or the function, or the whatever.
Yes.
You know?
The other venture you're involved in, Optique, they're essentially, I suppose, a low-cost optometrist. There might be a better way to put that. But they offer, I wasn't sure that I was reading this correctly, an eye test for less than 100 Rand. I mean, that's astonishing.
Yeah, so I think the challenge there is, you know, with technology and also just making it a little bit more affordable and accessible. 99 Rand eye test, same price for all the frames. Someone can walk in, there's a bit of a buy now, pay later model built in. So I guess a little bit of fintech and you know, online, and I think we've got 19 stores now, and our funding is just rolling them out into you know, the people who really need it, you know. So eye care is not all about your branded sunglasses and all that. It is about eye care. And it is a nice tangible investment, you know, which is combined sort of technology and innovation and some real world challenges, which we also love to solve.
I mean, I find optometry fascinating because we've known so much about how eyes work and about how light works for, you know, literally 600-700 years since the first telescope was invented. And suddenly something must have shifted to allow you to be able to do an eye test, or Optique to be able to do an eye test at such a cheap price, and then to offer frames. And it would make sense that actually very cheap glasses frames would sell like hotcakes.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not about, at the end of the day, when you take the branding away of some of these things, it's just a piece of plastic, actually, or graphite, or whatever you want to call it. It needs to be modern and look fine. And if you actually have the right suppliers and you do some of it yourself, and again, local talent combined with, Leon van Vieren and the guys have done an amazing job of putting all of that together. And let's just add a bunch of actuaries behind it to say, well, hang on, you know, this if you put some modeling behind it, some technology behind it, and you create there's a massive target market and huge challenge. And that's what we love, you know, basically huge target market, a team that can execute, and an awesome product. That's what we look for. So yeah, we've done a few investments this year, backing some amazing entrepreneurs, you know, Theo Kitzelf and the guys at Stickit, and Johan and then the guys at Tamera. so you go. So I think it's a great space. I mean, Nice Capital turned 15 this year, and I'm more excited than ever about South African entrepreneurs and what they bring to the table. While you report on politicians and people doing other things, we'll just carry on carrying the economy with the entrepreneurs for you guys.
Well, thanks very much. We need you to do it. Geert van Zyl, I do appreciate it. Co-founder and partner at Knife Capital, and hopefully someone who's able to sort out cash, children and tuck jobs, more importantly than any of the space stuff that he's talking about. In a moment, we will continue conversations. Children are on holiday, of course. Cell phones, children, money and numbers. We'll be looking at that. And then don't forget, investment school this evening as well. How to invest like an analyst. That's coming up next. First, on The Money Show, your latest eyewitness news.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporates and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Lots coming up in the next little while. Be speaking to Siphumelele Zondi. He's been looking at the impact of phones on children and their ability to manage numbers, something that actually, when you think about it, does make perfect sense. I remember a long, long time ago when we started to do some exams with calculators, people older than me being a little concerned about the fact that we could do that. I wonder if you had the same experience. Also looking at small businesses and how to manage money. And then investment school tonight. Don't forget, we'll be looking at how to invest like an analyst, what an analyst decides and how they make the decisions that they do. Looking forward to that conversation. I think a lot coming out of that. Good to hear from you this evening on 011 883 0702 021 4460567 and voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
I wonder if you and your children have the same relationship with numbers. There are about 5 different cell phone numbers, 5 different numbers I can remember in my head. I can remember the numbers of the houses in which I lived as I was growing up. I can remember at least 2 of them. I can remember my wife's cell phone number. I can remember mine. I can remember a boss's. I can remember Mandy Wiener's for some reason. She'll probably tell you why when she was a reporter at EWN and I was reading news. I can remember a few others. But I wonder if now the fact that every single number you ever need is in your cell phone is making a little bit of a difference. Siphumelele Zondi is a tech expert. He joins us now. Siphumelele, good evening. I don't know if it matters to me. People tell me my memory is going anyway. It does matter to my children, and I wonder if children are not really paying much attention to memorizing numbers.
Hello, Stephen, and I'm going to ask you a question before we get into it.
Yes.
Are you a boomer, Stephen?
Am I a boomer?
Yes.
Wow, that's personal. Just sort of at the tail end, but I'm actually the child of boomers, if that makes sense. So I was born in the 70s.
Yes. All right. Research and multiple research shows that if you are born at a time when, before there were cell phones, your memory would be stronger than someone who is born in a time of mobile devices, because every time someone asks you for a cell number, you go into your phone and you look for somebody's number, and you'll then read it out for them as opposed to you remembering that cell phone. And a lot of people don't even have house numbers anymore. So if you grew up at a time, for example, there were house phones, and you didn't have a cell phone, you'd have to remember your house phone. If you, let's say you didn't have a cell phone and maybe your parents, because there was a time when the elders would get the phone and the kids would not. And I think about when I was younger, my parents had cell phones. I remember my father's cell number because he's kept the same one, and I didn't when I was a teenager. So because of that, you'd then be forced to remember numbers. But now, and the kids that are growing up now, a lot of them don't even have house phones anymore. And every time they need to call somebody, they go into their device and then they look for the number that they need to look for. God forbid, should, let's say, the phone crashes, because you see people panicking when phones crash. How am I going to call this person if I need to be picked up? How is that person going to know what time to pick me up? Because they don't remember phone numbers anymore. And but it could possibly go into other parts of memory, because it starts with something that's small, but do you remember other things if you don't remember phone numbers, especially phone numbers that you dial every day?
I mean, I do wonder about just numeracy skills as well, because, mental arithmetic, having to remember certain things, your times table, things like that. Now it's all done electronically. And it's also, we probably speak to each other less and text each other more, which means the entire way we deal with numbers has changed fundamentally.
And yes, and that would also be caused by the fact a conversation that I have had on short videos that are now popular on social media, because they too do not require you to concentrate for a very long time in order for you to know something. Like in order for you to, for example, enjoy a book, you need to find a little corner, enjoy it, sit still for about an hour, 2 hours every day while you're reading this book, and be with your own thoughts sometimes as well. And if you are constantly consuming these short videos, do you really develop the part of your memory that's going to help you to sort of like memorize information? And think about movies as well, because the content we used to enjoy in the past would be like a 1.5 hour long movie, would be a 2 hour movie. Cinemas are shutting down because people are not even going to the movies anymore because of consumption habits having changed, and also having been changed by these mobile devices that we use, that kids are using during the holidays or even sometimes during weekends. And so do you then get to concentrate for a long time? You speak about arithmetic, which you used to do by hand. It requires a lot of concentration for you to do that, for you to memorize that, and for you to memorize a table, for example. Whereas today you can just go on social media, you can go on different platforms, look for these things, and your device shows it to you, or you find a video, a short video that's going to show it to you in 2 minutes. But do you memorize it, or do you know it for those couple of seconds after you've seen it for that 2 minutes?
I mean, there's a lot there. And I mean, I know someone, I don't know where I heard it, but he's a lecturer at a college in the States. And he said, if he says to his students, so let's just say between 18 and 22, he says to them, how many of you have TikTok? How many of you have Netflix? They all put up all of their hands for both. He says, how many of you hate TikTok? And quite a few will put up their hands. How many of you hate Netflix? And nobody does. And that's really the difference, isn't it? You get something from watching a movie. You could spend, I think Trevor Noah's made this point, actually, curious person to make it, but an important one, that you could spend an hour and a half surfing the web or an hour and a half reading the book. If you read the book, you'll actually feel you've done something of value.
Totally, and you've learned a lot of information because you actually sat down and you concentrated and you read it for a long time, and it would make sense. The characters of the book would move from point A to point B, as opposed to just watching something for 2 minutes. You move on to another, something else for 2 minutes, something else for another 2 minutes, and 2 hours later you've gone way deep into this rabbit hole where you're consuming a lot of short videos, and you are not really memorizing any of them. It's a lot of stuff that you consumed in those 2 hours, but you did not have to. Whereas with a book, it takes you from point A, a movie as well, takes you from point A to point B, and you have to concentrate in order for you to perhaps maybe even know what the turning point is. Remember what happened in the beginning that led you to this a particular point. Whereas with these short videos, you don't have to remember anything really.
So children on holiday, we all have to go and work. They can't really take their cell phones away from them. I mean, they would die, they would say. How do you then try and cultivate some good habits? How do you try and turn it into a better thing?
I suppose because when these conversations are spoken about, it's often from a perspective of addiction, and yes, that can be a problem. So then as parents, you need to know when to create some time outs from digital technologies and create tasks in the way that some tasks were actually used in the olden days. I actually saw a photo of Rihanna with her little one a couple of days ago with an old school toy, really, on the side of a sports match. And so she's removed the digital tool that you often see kids are watching, and she's given the little one an old school toy in order for them to then learn the old school way too. Because you need to then create little moments for the child, and maybe even a time that the time that the kid will be spending on a digital device, and monitor what they would be doing with that digital device while they are spending that time on a digital device. Because if you don't monitor it, then they could be doing all sorts of things, including things that don't actually build them educationally. And there's a lot of information that can build the kid, not even information, maybe even apps, right, that can help the kids. But sometimes some timeouts are quite good for the kids during the holiday season, for them to do other things too.
See, Pumelele Zondi, thanks so much, our tech expert. And as he's talking about things, particularly for young children, I'm reminded that I think for both my children, and I suspect for me, one of our favorite toys was a big telephone on wheels. I still remember the sort of orange earpiece, and you could pick it up and pull the thing around. Made a nice big noise.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Small business focus. One of the big conversations we keep having on the Money Show is around how difficult it is for smaller firms to get their hands on capital. Every time I've spoken to a small business owner, they've told me how difficult it is. But the real trick is to get the right amount of money at the right time. Longcledo Mtwentwe is managing director at managing director at Vantage Advisory. Longcledo, good evening to you. You suggest the real problem may not actually be a lack of money, but the way in which smaller firms are managing themselves.
Absolutely. Good evening, Stephen, and good evening as well to the production team. Interesting enough, a few weeks ago, I visited one of the websites of our DFIs, and I picked up what one of the CEOs said was that, look, there's no shortage of funding per se in South Africa, but it's more of just fundable solutions that is becoming sort of like a challenge for them. And we know that most of the time, and we've said this before, that the funding landscape in South Africa is pretty much conservative, and for any other businesses that is just below 5 years, it's extremely tough for them to raise funding. And, with one practical example, for instance, you will remember this, Stephen, 4 or 5 years ago, we had what we call a COVID-19 guarantee scheme. Initially, it was about 100 billion. It was increased to about 200 billion, where government was clear to say, private financiers and the banks, you can lend to small businesses in South Africa, and then we will guarantee that scheme. And the funders came back to say, look, we really can't fund most of these SMEs. Out of the 200 billion rand that was guaranteed, only about 18 billion was dispersed. And there were a number of reasons for that. Was that, look, one, some of these businesses that are applying for funding are not fundable. They lack collateral, poor financials and all of that. So that talks to a system where you are saying, even if there is a guarantee scheme by government, however, the industry, is still applying some of those conservative rules to fund our businesses. So therefore, it's one of those challenges. But what I like, Steve, is that now in South Africa, we do have a funding policy, under the Department of Small Business Development that was signed now in February. That is clear in terms of what needs to be done to assist some of these SMEs to access funding, because it has been a challenge for quite some time. And what needs to happen right now is to really implement the policy and assist some of these businesses to create the jobs that we're actually bleeding on.
I mean, I suppose one of the things is that people are often looking for money in a crisis, and what you want to do is avoid the crisis. You need to try and plan better, but it's quite difficult to plan well when you're starting out a small business.
Yeah, most of the time that's what happens. Most businesses, when they start, they focus on what needs to be done, and somehow there's a pothole, and then there's this puncture, and you didn't plan enough, and the cash runs out. So therefore, I think one of the most important things when it comes to your business is to really be intentional in terms of when do you want to scale, and what are some of the provisions that you need to start implementing now, so that if there's any emergencies where you need funding, at least your house is in order. And that includes, your governance, your structure, your financial records are actually in place. The moment you don't have that, it becomes, too difficult to raise funding, because the South Africa funding is not something that you just get within 24 hours. There are processes, there's NCR that has to be applied. So therefore, most businesses have to be very intentional from day one that as you continue to grow, somehow you will need funding. So therefore, how do you prepare for that? You start very much easier to say what will be needed, what are some of the funders are looking for, or what are some of the investors are looking for, so that when the time is right, at least you're able to actually provide whatever that is needed to be provided.
I suppose what you also need to do is to work out how far in advance you might need capital. In other words, you need to be quite strategic about it, and you need to make sure that you have a relationship with the people you might need that capital from.
Absolutely. I always say when it comes to funding or attracting investment, you need to know who are the right funders or the right investors that you need to start identifying already. Because, the moment you don't know where to go, you will go left, you'll go north, you'll go all of that without knowing. So the moment you start to identify which funders are funding your sector, that have appetite to your sector, that have really so much interest in terms of what you're doing, it becomes pretty much easier. So one of the things that we've picked up is that the funders as well, they differ in terms of geography where you're at. And sometimes some of the funding that you need, what we've picked up with the startups is that most of them are starting to raise capital, not in South Africa, but internationally so, because they understand where the risk or the appetite is at. It's not only in South Africa, but it's more across Africa, where you're going to get different funders as you partner with different accelerators and the incubators that are going to connect you with the right funders. And that's what you need to do from day one so that you're able to meet your growth needs.
I was going to ask about location. I mean, I have this maybe a prejudice in my head that actually the closer you are to a big urban area, the easier it may be to get funding. And that's also about what people understand, what the market is. It's about the possibilities for growth, all sorts of things.
Which is very much said, I must say, especially for people in the townships, especially for people in the rural areas, because for them the access and the networks when it comes to these fundings or some of these elite circles or the incubators I spoke about, they're not easily accessible to them. So the closer you are to some of the major metros, of course, you get to have access to different types or different support structures that you might have. So it's one of those as well. When you start to build a business, you need to structure to say, how do you have operations? Of course, far too often we've seen that with mining entities, where some of the head offices are closer to the urban areas because that's where the capital is at. So it's one of those things as well as you start to grow your business, is to say, how do you start to get closer to the capital? And if you do that somehow, you will find that you will be able to grow very well.
Lunqedo, thanks so much. Lunqedo Mtwentwe is Managing Director, Advantage Advisory.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Voice notes coming in tonight after that conversation with Siphumelele about cell phones and children.
Hi, Stephen. Great show and good interview with your tech expert. Outside of the numerous challenges with using phones, I think that you can also probably put that down to the mental load that needs to be taken when you are looking at navigating your way from one place to another. In the past, you would have had to remember, take the third road right or the second road left. look out for points of interest. However, nowadays we just follow Google Maps, and if your phone goes flat and you try and recreate that trip, you don't know where you're going. It's amazing, actually. It shows you how much we're concentrating.
It really is. It's such a good point. And I mean, I remember when I'd first just learned to drive, 18, 19, 20, lucky enough to be able to drive while a student at university. And friends of mine used to say, it's best to get lost with Stephen because he's always been lost there before, which I wasn't quite sure how to take that, but it did make sense to me. That actually you want to be lost with someone who's been lost before because you will have been paying attention. Acres, a whole millennium before cell phones came along. Just gone 7:30.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
The Investment School. Well, you'll have heard us speak to analyst after analyst on The Money Show, and we'll often talk to investment analysts about how they make the decisions that they do. What is it that they're interested in? Tonight on Investment School, how do analysts decide where to put the money? Or, if you wanted to give it a better title, how would you learn how to invest like an analyst? Dr. Musa Malwandla is the Co-Chief Investment Officer of Differential Capital, and Mbasa Mkhwetyana is the Deputy Head of Research at Mazi Capital. Thank you both for coming in. I really do appreciate it. Mbasa, if I may just start with you. If someone says to me, how do analysts make their decisions? How do they decide where to put money, what to recommend? I have an image of someone sitting in a room surrounded by lots of screens and maybe still some documents. Where do you start with making decisions?
Good evening, Stephen. Yeah, analysts, what we really do is spend time doing research on the companies that we need to invest in. So we collect information, we analyze that information, and we kind of generate actionable insights. And in the end, we end up with some kind of recommendation, which is either a buy and a sell. So at the core of it, it's about that recommendation. And the backdrop of that is really then the analysis, which includes a financial model and all the insights that you will have collected. So it can come from the financial information that the company discloses, including an annual report. It can go to speaking to industry experts and also speaking to management teams and getting information.
Is it just numbers? I would like to think it's more than that. You might want to think, well, this company looks pretty good on AI and this company doesn't know what AI is. And so that's not about numbers, that's about something else.
Yes, exactly. So it's more than numbers. So there's a whole lot more work that goes in the more qualitative side of things and in generating that insight. So there's a whole lot of reading that you have to do, and some of the factors that you may consider and the risks around the company. So if I can say, if you're trying to pick a company and you want to know what the company does, how it does, what it does. So from a strategy perspective, what's the company's strategy, and what's the track record of the management team in executing that strategy, and in the end, try and utilize all of that information to generate some numerical number, which we call a valuation.
Musa, you must really have to get a lot more than skin deep in a company. You have to really get deep into the inner workings, and yet you don't work for it.
Yeah, I think that's true. So it's really complex in terms of the amount of data you usually have to sift through. So, in fact, in many cases, the starting point is the financials of the company, but where it ends and where it leads you is usually in forests of data. So you will look at, obviously the starting point in South Africa, you would go to Stats SA to figure out trends. You might look at sub-reports and data. But it really doesn't stop there. I mean, you might do channel calls. So in other words, figure out the pricing that a particular company is getting from its suppliers. What is it selling at? Those are the kinds of data insights that usually form that view you have on the company. And it really is, it's undefined in where it can lead you.
I mean, Ambassador, I have this idea in my head of someone sending a drone over Pick n Pay, Checkers and Spar and Woolworth stores to see how many cars there are in the parking lots. Or someone's counting the delivery motorbikes at 5 to 8 in the morning before they open. I mean, does it get to that level? Or have I just been watching Billions too much?
Too much Billions, Stephen. But there is a lot of channel checks that happens, as he mentioned. So, I mean... some of the things that I do when I walk into the store, I'll kind of look out for promotions, and those are some of the indicators that will tell you whether the company is doing well or not. So if you're going to a Grootes, for example, and you see a lot of promotion in season, that would kind of give you a signal whether this company is likely to do well or not. Because if you're promoting a lot, I guess, in season, that's something that could be more negative for your pricing that comes through in the numbers.
Musa, what kind of person does it take to be a good analyst? I mean, you would need to know about more than just the company. You need to know a lot about what's happening around the company too.
Yeah, so that's true. So you need a lot of curiosity. I think that's a starting point. And obviously, financial numeracy. You should be very, very comfortable with the numbers, with building a financial model, so working your way through a spreadsheet. So all of those, take for granted that you need them. But there are a few other things. So, the way I think about it is usually it's not about getting the idea, but it's about living with it once it's in the fund. And I think that's, once you've invested money in it. And there what it requires is fortitude, right? A strong stomach, because there will be days. I mean, the point is when you participate in markets, the cost of that is volatility, and you will get some things wrong. How do you live with those things? And sometimes it's not even about being wrong. It's about volatility for its own sake. The markets move up and down. How do you sleep on a day when a stock is down 5% and you've invested 5% of the fund in it? So those are the kinds of behavioral features that you need. And I would say a certain level of intellectual humility. So what I mean by that is you will be wrong. And when you're wrong, how do you learn from those and make better decisions next time? And what does it tell you about the other funds, positions you have in the portfolio? And I say the last point is around the behavioral bias, that is confirmation bias. So once you've invested in an idea, oftentimes you look for information that only confirms the idea rather than, and from a risk management perspective, it's actually a terrible thing to do, right? You want to look for information that could possibly invalidate the idea and therefore allow you to move out quicker. And unfortunately, most of us, that's a bias that we come inbuilt with. So there are several of these kinds of behavioral issues that you need to think about.
Mbasa, I mean, it's an interesting mix. Someone who's curious, humble, so that's a few of us out then. And then you also need to have fortitude, lovely word. I mean, you need to be able to have some intellectual strength to have those things.
No, I mean, exactly. I mean, it goes a long way. So those are some of the things that you also build with your experience. So when you start in the industry, some of the tricks and trades you learn as you go. So one of the things, I never thought I would have to do is when you interview management, the skill of having to ask someone questions and also write the information that you're getting so that you can use it later on. So that's something, those are some of the skills that you kind of build over time as and when you are working in the industry.
How important is it to know which questions to ask and to get them to answer them? I mean, I'm supposed to be able to do that professionally, and I sometimes come away frustrated. I mean, that must be one of the big things. You'll be asking someone who knows their company intimately. You're an outsider to it, and you have to get them to cough up the real details.
I mean, it's very important. You only get very little time, so you can get sometimes an hour with this management team, and you have to get the best insight. So that's why you spend more time reading and covering all the other stuff that you cannot get. You can get publicly, but the stuff that you cannot get, then you can speak to the management team. I mean, it's really about being prepared and making sure that you cover the points that matter, that are going to impact your investment thesis.
Musa, so when people are making these decisions, and a lot rests on these decisions, I mean, it's always other people's money, right? What kind of qualifications do people tend to have?
Yeah, so it's usually your CA, I mean, that's the standard one. So CA, CFA, so the Chartered Financial Analyst. Sometimes it's, your actuarial qualifications, economists, and increasingly these days it's your quants, so your mathematicians, statisticians. Those are, I would say, the base kinds of qualifications you start to see. It does differ by the style of the investment approach. So in other words, if you're a value manager, if you're a thematic investor, those will require different types of skills. So if you're a quant fund or investment house, you'll obviously require different sets of skills. So it does differ substantially across the various approaches.
Is there any space anywhere for people who maybe are historians or understand a society to kind of know which direction things are going? Or is it only really the hard maths?
It was interesting enough, historians, in fact, economic historians actually tend to make, great investors, particularly longer-term investors. So thinking about not just what's happening to a company, but to a whole macro environment. Is the U.S. going in decline now, and how will the transition happen between the U.S. and China? That's something that a historian might be able to solve. In fact, many of the great investors become great investors by studying the history. So I think, but again, it depends on the style, right? So if you're a quant investment house, obviously there's probably very little scope for that kind of skill set. But in many cases there are.
I'm reminded Ben Bernanke, a former chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, did his doctoral thesis on the Great Depression. And I think at one point actually apologized on behalf of the Federal Reserve for the Depression. Mbasa, so if you have a group of analysts in a room and you're all looking at a company, does it help to have people with slightly diverse experiences or slightly diverse interests to make a better decision? Or would a fund rely on kind of one analyst per company?
No, I mean, it actually helps a lot to have those diverse views, because what you spoke about earlier, confirmation bias, that's one of the ways you can try and eliminate that. Because if you're an analyst, sometimes you can also look at a stock in a particular way because you've looked at it for a long time and kind of miss some things, whereas someone else that's speaking to you can kind of pick up something that you've missed and make a better decision. So diverse teams are actually very helpful.
And would you have, generally speaking, would you have one analyst covering a big company like a Capitec or a ShopRite or something like that? Or would a firm or would a fund try and have more than one?
No, so an analyst gets allocated one stock and you would cover that stock. So you'd get a universe of stocks basically that you cover, but you'd obviously be the main party that is responsible for those stocks, and then you go back and speak to your colleagues about it. So usually we sit in investment committee meetings where we debate some of these ideas. So whatever view I have on Capitec or Mr. Price, I'll come and put it on the table, and the team will hear my view and also obviously debate any pointers that I might not have covered.
Musa, when decisions are being made, it must depend on what kind of fund. So, for example, if you're investing in some pensions funds for people who are just starting out in their 20s and 30s, they'll sort of be aggressive or moderate aggressive. You'll have some funds that are deliberately designed to not be aggressive at all. So a lot of the decisions must be determined by the kind of fund that you're actually looking at, right? So it's not just about the analysts, it's what they're actually advising for.
Yes. Yeah, so the base toolkit of an analyst is the same, but what you apply those skills to differs materially, as you said. So, for instance, if you are looking at a growth fund, so in other words, the style of investing is a growth approach, you would be looking for companies that are likely to grow very well, have a massive total addressable market, and are undervalued. In other words, the market is appreciating that growth potential. Whereas if you're a value investor, what you look for is cheap companies, quote unquote. So those are companies that have a high price to earnings multiple. In other words, the value of the company relative to how much profits are being made is high, or rather it's currently low, and there's a potential for upside. So that's material differences in terms of how you would apply your skill sets across those different types of styles. Now, in terms of how you then assemble the portfolio, because that's another part of it. So you, as an analyst, you'll collect ideas and you'll submit them to the team, you'll present them. Now, when it comes to putting the portfolio together, so if you think about an analyst as a scout for talent, for good ideas, a portfolio manager now has the job of figuring out which players to put into the team, who's going to play defense, who's going to play offense. You can't have too much of one. So that's where diversification comes into effect. And now if you think about a fund that's targeted at 30-year-olds, people are early in their investment careers, that means you might be able to take on more risks. So you might have a more offensive fund, if you will, and as you approach retirement, it might then switch to more conservative, more defensive positions within the fund. So it does pretty much boil down to what it is you're trying to achieve in your investment goals and the approach you take as a team.
You're with Investment School on The Money Show this evening. How investment analysts help decide where money goes is our topic. Dr. Musa Malwandla is the Chief Investment Officer of Differential Capital, and Basam Khwetiana is the Deputy Head of Research at Mazi Capital. More in a moment.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
How do analysts make the decisions that they do? How you could invest like an analyst if you like. We're speaking to Dr. Musa Malwandla, the Co-Chief Investment Officer of Differential Capital, and Mbasa Khwetiana is the Deputy Head of Research at Mazi Capital. Mbasa, I do need to ask about how, I've noticed in my time on The Money Show, you need to ask this question, how people are compensated as analysts. What I'm really going to, and I don't mean well or badly, I think I know the answer, but in terms of, is there a compensation? Are they paid according to how well their recommendations have done, or is there some other way of doing it? Because I can see arguments in lots of directions here.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time, we as analysts we have a lot of responsibility where we take a lot of money and make decisions and invest. So it's important to also have those decisions be aligned with you as an analyst. So compensation does include an element where the performance of the fund, so where the performance of the fund drives the part of your compensation, which aligns the interest in that decision making.
Musa, I suppose what it does is it keeps people honest, right? It makes you really think about it. If you are doing badly and losing money, you kind of want, the analyst to understand what that feels like, but you also want them to be incentivized correctly.
Correct. So you need to be fair. So the one part is skin in the game. That's really, really important. So you want to reward good work. So in other words, if great investment calls are being made, that needs to be attached to some level of remuneration. Now, the other side of this is that dependent on the philosophy or approach of the firm, so it might be that you're a value investment manager and value as an approach isn't working. In other words, it's underperforming, not because of the investment ideas themselves, but the approach is currently out of favor. So in a practical sense, growth companies, so companies that are geared to high levels of growth, will do well perhaps when the economy is doing really well. So in a recession, you might not. So does that mean that you need to underpay your analysts? So those kinds of nuances need to come into the conversation. But ultimately, skin in the game is still really important.
Is there an element, Mbasa, about analysts all thinking together in group thinking? Let me just explain what I mean. Over the last few months, and NVIDIA in the US is such a good example. Everyone's been buying as much NVIDIA as they can, right? And I understand why if you look on the numbers. So you've got just unbelievable earnings updates, quarter after quarter after quarter. And what that means is that everyone's been trying to buy into it. But there's also hype around it. I mean, sometimes the share price does go down. Do analysts sometimes influence each other in maybe not a very positive way? Because everyone's getting involved. You don't want to be the one to put up their hand and say, I think we're a bit overweight in NVIDIA. Who wants to be that person? And what happens then? Is there an element of analysts kind of looking at each other to an extent?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that does happen. We've seen it in the past with analysts getting caught, or a firm getting caught with, with different stocks that bomb out. And it's easy, even though you might have different teams that are there. We all look at the same information. Sometimes it's easy to also kind of interpret that information in a similar manner. But we also, I think as an analyst, you go and read stuff that disagrees with what you are saying. And that also then helps in trying limiting that risk of everyone in the team having that one view that kind of catches you.
I mean, before you read someone saying no to NVIDIA, someone has to write that first, right? Isn't that one of the problems?
No, correct. NVIDIA is one stock where some people think it's a one-way bet. We've seen it come down, which is why also people are still seeing an opportunity to still buy. I also I am one of those that do think that there's still long-term prospects and opportunities in NVIDIA, but I guess it's all about the price that you pay and the value that you want to derive from it.
So we've got literally 20 seconds for you to answer this very difficult question. It is becoming easier for people to invest themselves. Is there still a role for analysts?
Yeah, I think increasingly with more data, any individual to get to the level of competence and coverage of the information that it requires to make good investment decisions is virtually impossible.
So in other words, you've got a long-term future in your game.
I think so.
I like confidence, I must say. Dr. Musa Malwandla is the Co-Chief Investment Officer of Differential Capital, and Basim Khwetiana is the Deputy Head of Research at Mazi Capital on Investment School with you this evening.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, on the back of that conversation, you may be pleased to know that American markets are up this evening. The Dow Jones is up 0.77, the Nasdaq up just over 1%, and the S&P 500 up 0.83. And that, as our analysts would tell you, is partly because of what's happening to tech stocks in the US. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.